The wind howled like a beast, cold, bitter. The air cut through his coat, biting at his skin. Every breath felt sharp, like he was breathing glass. And there, just beyond the snowdrifts, the silhouettes of men moved in the dark. He could hear them, boots crunching through the thick snow, voices low and tense. He tightened his grip on the rifle, fingers numb. His heart pounded in his chest. Sweat mixed with the cold, making his body tremble. He had to stay still, silent. If they found him now, it was over. A twig snapped. A shadow loomed and his stomach dropped. It was too close to escape. His eyes darted around, searching for a way out. The snow was deep, the moonlight too bright. There was no cover. He held his breath. Every muscle in his body screamed to run, but he knew if he moved, it would be the last thing he ever did. The footsteps stopped. A voice whispered in the distance, so close he could almost touch it. Where did he go? He didn't dare answer. If they knew where he was, they'd have him. It was that simple. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. And then, just as he thought the silence might swallow him whole, something changed. The sound of helicopters. The roar of engines far above, breaking the stillness of the night. They were close now. Too close. Suddenly, a shout rang out. "Get down!" The moment he had feared had arrived. His heart raced faster. His hands shook. And just like that, everything changed. The plan was about to fall apart. Let's rewind. This wasn't just a random night in the cold. This was part of something much bigger. Something that would soon change everything for both Norway and the United States. Greenland. A vast, icy land that seemed to be forgotten by the world, tucked away far in the north. To the countries around it, Greenland was a prize. But not just any prize. It was a key to the Arctic, to resources, to control over the seas. For years it had been a quiet tug-of-war between great powers. Norway, a country rich in oil, had its eye on this key. They were looking to expand, to stretch their influence. But it wasn't just about the land. Greenland sat like a strategic treasure chest in the middle of the ocean, and whoever controlled it could control much more. Norway's leadership saw an opportunity. They believed they could claim Greenland, push out the Danish authorities, and build a new future for their country. But there was a problem. Greenland was already under Danish control, and Denmark wasn't about to give up this frozen island without a fight. Enter the United States. The U.S. had its own ambitions in the Arctic. The Cold War was raging, and every nation was scrambling to secure power. When they caught wind of Norway's plan to seize Greenland, they saw a chance to strengthen their own position. They had one simple rule: keep Europe's power moves in check, especially in such a critical part of the world. So, the stage was set. Norway believed it had the upper hand. The U.S. had its eyes on the prize. And Denmark? Well, Denmark had no choice but to protect what was theirs. Little did they know, this race for Greenland was about to take a deadly turn. It all started with a series of quiet, calculated moves. Norway's leaders didn't shout their intentions from the rooftops. They worked in the shadows. The first step was to create alliances with local Greenlandic leaders, those who were tired of being ruled by Denmark. Norwegian diplomats made secret trips to Greenland, meeting with tribal chiefs and influential figures. They promised better opportunities, a brighter future. And to some it seemed like an offer too good to ignore. Norway promised more independence, more control over their own land, a break from Denmark's grip. But then everything changed. Denmark wasn't blind. They caught wind of what Norway was up to, and they weren't about to let it slide. They increased their presence in Greenland, sending more soldiers, more resources. They built stronger relationships with the Greenlandic leaders who weren't swayed by Norway's promises. Tensions started to rise. The idea of a peaceful transfer of power was slipping through Norway's fingers. The Norwegian government began to take more aggressive actions. It wasn't enough to convince the locals. They needed to take control by force. But Denmark wasn't backing down either. The two countries were on the brink of war, and every move made by one was countered by the other. Norway's actions weren't as subtle anymore. They began sending military units to the shores of Greenland, closer than ever before. The world watched as the tensions grew. But it wasn't just Denmark who was concerned. The United States was watching too. They had their own plans, their own interest in Greenland, especially as the Cold War heated up. The U.S. had always been wary of European powers getting too close to such strategic locations. They feared that if Norway succeeded, it might shift the balance of power in the region. The Arctic held key military importance: submarine bases, radar stations, airstrips. The U.S. couldn't afford to let Norway get too comfortable there. Then came the shock. The U.S. quietly made contact with Denmark, offering support. They would back Denmark in protecting Greenland, ensuring that Norway's plans were crushed before they could take hold. The US had its own military interests, and they weren't about to let a small country like Norway throw a wrench in their carefully laid plans. The move caught Norway by surprise. They had been so focused on their ambitions that they hadn't yet realized just how much the US was willing to intervene in a situation that seemed so distant. The US wasn't just watching from afar. They were planning. They were ready. As the diplomatic channels heated up and military moves became more pronounced, Norway found itself at a crossroads. They had underestimated their rivals. The Americans were not only standing in their way, they were actively working against them. But then, everything changed again. A small but significant mistake. Norway had made its first move too soon. They had started sending ships and troops in too early, before the plans were fully solidified, before the support of the Greenlandic people could be fully secured. They underestimated how quickly Denmark could rally its forces. News spread fast. A standoff was brewing on the cold shores of Greenland, and it wasn't just between Norway and Denmark anymore. The US had its hand in the game, and now the small island was the center of a much larger geopolitical storm. It all came to a head one icy night. The sea was churning as a fleet of Norwegian ships, armed to the teeth, cut through the frigid waters of the Arctic Ocean. Their target, Greenland's southern coastline, a critical entry point. They believed they could seize it before the Danish forces could even react. It was their moment. If they acted fast enough, they could control the vital airstrips, the key ports, and change the course of history. The first shots rang out just as the fleet hit the shores. The Norwegian troops hit the beaches, a well-coordinated assault. They thought they had the advantage. The Danish forces, though strong, were scattered, not expecting the attack. The chaos was like a storm. The noise of gunfire, the shouts of soldiers, the clash of metal, it was chaos, cold, sharp, and violent. But then, the Americans made their move. Helicopters roared in from above, their blades slicing through the frigid air. The US Navy, hidden behind the cover of the fog, descended on Greenland's shores with precision. Their planes, packed with soldiers and supplies, landed just as the battle intensified. The Americans had the element of surprise. They had waited for this moment. Just as the Norwegian forces thought they had won, the US made its appearance. The Norwegian troops, caught in the crossfire, scrambled. They had expected Denmark to fight back, but not this. The Americans were fast, efficient, and ruthless. They took control of key positions within hours. Within minutes, the battle shifted. The Norwegian forces, stretched thin and unprepared for such a large-scale intervention, began to fall back. But the US wasn't here just to stop Norway. They had their own designs. They had been preparing for this moment, ensuring that their forces would dominate Greenland, regardless of the outcome. The battle wasn't just about stopping Norway, it was about securing Greenland for themselves. They knew that if they didn't act fast, they would lose a strategic foothold in the Arctic, one that could change the balance of the Cold War. As the hours ticked by, it became clear. Norway had underestimated the Americans. They had miscalculated how much the US would risk for Greenland. Their plan to seize the island was unraveling in front of their eyes. The winds howled louder than before, and the conflict raged on. Blood was spilled in the snow, and the cold, unforgiving landscape became a battleground. The final shots were fired, and when the smoke cleared, it wasn't Norway who stood victorious. It wasn't Denmark. It was the United States. They had beaten both countries to the punch, taking control of Greenland in a flash of military might. When the dust settled, Greenland was no longer the prize of a small Scandinavian country. The island was in American hands, and the power struggle had come to an abrupt and final end. Norway's attempt to claim Greenland failed, a costly mistake that would haunt its leaders for years to come. The US had not only secured Greenland for itself, but it had also sent a message to the world. No one could make a move in the Arctic without America as say-so. The lesson? In the coldest corners of the world, power isn't just about who it's closest. It's about who has the strength to take it. And in the end, Norway's dreams of controlling Greenland were crushed, not by Denmark, but by a far larger force. And the final line, sometimes the coldest battles are fought with the warmest of ambitions.